Hey guys, thanks for clicking on Pro Talk Outdoors. Here's another diving deep edition, and this is going to be an excellent episode. Going to be joined by Mark Drury, along with Wyatt Rivers and myself, and going to talk about a whole lot of really interesting things. Things that some topics that maybe you've never heard Mark discuss before on any other previous podcast or video or anything. We're going to talk about things like conservation. Hunter recruitment is a big topic in this one, but in addition to that, we're going to give plenty of great information from Mark as far as we're going to talk about moon phases and weather and patterning certain bucks and food plotting and just a whole wide range of topics. So this is definitely one that I will tell you right now, might want to hit pause on this for just a second. Get a pen and a pad of paper or something to take some notes on if you can. This is definitely one you're going to want to listen to a couple of times, maybe. Lots and lots of great information in this episode. But before we get Mark on, I did want to throw out there a couple different things that are going on with us right now. Busy time of year, especially for those that are out there food plotting, putting out mineral, those things. The real world soybeans, we've got all those planted in the ground. I think we put out roughly 15 acres already this spring with our, the Pro Talk Outdoors crew. And, so we're going back through and getting ready to spray those and doing all those sorts of things. But the Maximizer minerals in the ground now, getting lots of pictures to start rolling in. Bucks are really kind of starting to tell us a little bit about who they are. And, that's an exciting time of year. One thing I did want to mention, Wicked Tree Gear, Glacier Coolers, an outstanding giveaway that is going on throughout the summer here. Whitetail Heaven Outfitters is a tremendous outfitter. They've got operations in, I know in Kentucky, Indiana, Ohio, and they've got some spring turkey stuff down in Florida as well. But definitely the Kentucky, Ohio, Indiana whitetail operation is second to none, first class all the way. If you place an order online through Wicked Tree Gear or Glacier Coolers, anytime between June 11th or July 13th, you're going to be entered for a giveaway, a prize package worth nearly $4,000 in a hunt and $1,000 a year. Again, that's a free giveaway. All you have to do is go online, place an order with Wicked Tree Gear or Glacier Coolers, and you're going to be entered to win a free hunt. It's a muzzleloader hunt plus $1,000 worth of gear. And remember, when you go to checkout, use the promo code PROTALK, PROTALK, for an additional 20% off on that purchase. So it's a win-win. Going to get 20% off, get some great gear, and also be entered to win a fantastic hunt with Whitetail Heaven Outfitters. Okay, we're going to go ahead and roll into the show. Hey guys, welcome back to another edition of Diving Deep here on Pro Talk Outdoors, and Wyatt and I here are joined by a guy that really needs absolutely no introduction, but we'll give him an introduction anyway, Mr. Mark Drury of Drury Outdoors. Thanks for joining us, Mark.
Man, I'm glad to be here. Thank you so much for having me, guys.
Absolutely. We're happy to have you as a guest.
So, Mark, I guess just start off by telling us, so what's going on with you guys right now? I mean, what are you, I know you're working on something. Tell me what you're working on.
Well, a lot of different things. We just wrapped up turkey season and getting back to where we're doing some studio work to get the final interviews needed for our first few shows of the year. We have to ship those for show one on all three of the Outdoor Channel shows this Thursday. So we're putting the finishing touches on shows one, and then every week after that we have to ship a new show on 3 different episodes for 13 straight weeks, or 12 more straight weeks, 13 episodes total. So each week we ship 3 new titles. So it's there's a lot of stress this time of year getting all the new graphics and all the different things in. That's the studio side. On the farm side, man, we're moving blinds and moving stands and clearing shooting lanes and mowing trails and spraying food plots, and it's a litany of things that are going on the farm right now. A lot of plans to get on deer that we want to get on this fall. We're trying to put those in place now so that we reduce intrusion as we get closer to the season.
That's an interesting point right there, and I kind of like to key in on that maybe first. And knowing that you guys you have deer that you get some knowledge of and you build a relationship with before you actually go after them, and a lot of times I think you know these deer years in advance before you put them on the hit list. So can you talk a little bit about how do you strategize or plan for a particular deer, knowing that you're going to want to go after that deer in the fall? Is there anything you're doing in particular, from shed season to now in preparation for actually going after a specific deer?
Everyone's different. So each one requires a little different strategy and a little different plan. And it really, to me, it's divided in, he's one of two different types of deer. He's either a homeboy that seems to stay on you throughout the entire year. So you have to be very cautious about that because he's already there, and you got to be careful if you're doing new plots or new stands, knowing that he's probably there somewhere. Because he's one that you get pictures of from the moment you put the cameras out, and he's still there when you take him down. And then there's the deer that they just show up sometime right after they shed their velvet, or perhaps sometime in and around the rut. There's two different types of bucks that show up that I've noticed. One of them comes right after they shed their velvet. Another one always shows up in late October. What the difference is, I don't know. It's just that home ranges do change a little bit, but that really doesn't explain the homeboys that seem to stay there the entire year. It's kind of crazy. So I think part of it is just having good habitat, having a well-balanced herd, having food, having cover, having water. There are deer that come from less suitable habitats, and then they'll come there and stay. So depending on which category the buck is, that's kind of how I make my strategies going into the season. So if it's a buck that I've had a lot of pictures of, say at age 3, age 4, and you think at age 5 he's going to look really good and it could be a target deer, then I'll put certain food plots in areas where I get a lot of daylight activity of that deer in preparation for the season. And I like to do those things ahead of the season and be careful if it is a homeboy. If it's not, you don't have to be nearly as careful because he's probably not there yet. So it's really just common sense and kind of using the information that you have at your fingertips when you go out to make the plan.
That's interesting. So let me ask you this, Mark. So you mentioned, those deer are kind of in three different categories. Some of them are their homeboys, and then some of them are coming in, as soon as they get hard-horned, and then some of them are, kind of late October. And you mentioned structuring food plots around that. So is there a particular type of food plot that you want to go with depending on when that buck shows up on your property and to try to help you capitalize on killing that deer?
Absolutely, yeah. If it's a buck that I had great history with in terms of daylight photos in a certain area during the early part of the season, then I'm going to make sure that I plan a food plot that I feel like is going to be very palatable during that time of the season. So I would have done one of two. I would have planted a spring planting of non-typical clover from Biologic early in the spring, probably late March, early April, so that it's a new planting and ready to go come fall. Or I'm going to do a fall planting of Biologic's deer radishes. To me, those two food plots are the best strategy for an early season attack. And I'll only do that, in areas where, okay, I've had this buck here, he's daylight here. Terry and I just had this conversation 2 hours ago. He's got two giants on his farm, and he said, I see a little crack in their armor. I went back through all my pictures, and he said, I had daylight pictures of both of these guys on this food plot from September 15th through mid-October, and then they went underground. And he goes, I'm moving in. I'm going to do a planting. He's going to match the planting he had last year, which was deer radishes, and he's actually moving a blind in closer to get a different shot at them based on where they were coming out. So we use last year's pictures a lot to make this year's strategies. However, if it's a buck that comes later in the year, the planting might be different. Or sometimes I mentioned three different types of bucks. There's really a fourth. It's one that comes for winter food source, and I have one specific deer on my mind that lives or comes onto my home place late season. He was right at 170 this past year. He's been there the last 2 years in a row, but he doesn't show up till December. So I've got a cornfield planted there for him. So it really depends on the buck and the overall time of the year, and then matching a food source that matches the time of the year that he shows up.
Mark, I have a question concerning that, and well, I guess it's a little bit different. So something that we notice on our main farm that happens quite a bit is it seems like when we have deer that reach 4.5 years old, a lot of times they leave, but then they'll come back at 5.5, or vice versa. We'll pick up a lot of 4.5-year-olds, for a year, and then they'll disappear. Do you notice trends similar to that, and do you have any reason as to why that may or may not happen?
I do notice that, and I notice every deer is different. It goes back to what I was saying earlier. Their personalities seem to differ. I've had bucks that seemingly don't leave 80 acres. I know they do, but seemingly they don't leave it a lot. And then you've got the next buck that you just walking all over the place. You catch him 2 miles apart from each other.
Right.
And one other thing I've noticed that goes along with that, it seems like those lazier bucks, the ones that don't move as much and you don't get as many pictures of, have better racks than the ones that do. And, my theory is they literally wear themselves out going into the next year, and they're just not as healthy as the ones that don't move as much.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, I've noticed that through the years. It's like those homeboys, the ones that don't move very much, just ultimately have better racks. So
you saying that
fighters
kind of. Sorry, go ahead. Sorry, I'm cutting you off.
Those bucks that come in with their racks broken every year and they're scarred up from their head all the way back to their tail, you can just about bet they're not going to look great the next year, because they just expend all their energy. They're fighters, they just expend all their energy, and they're not as healthy going into the winter. So they have different personalities, just like different dogs. You can line up 10 labs and they'll have 10 different personalities, and deer the same way. So a lot of it's just kind of monitoring that. But in answer specifically to your question, I don't have a good hard reason for you. It might depend on how big your property is. We've got some fairly big tracts, so we get to keep, not close track of them, but we get to see when they move. They're liable to move off of this end of the farm, and heck, you can catch them way over here, and it's just like, well, they moved, but they only moved about 600 or 700 acres away. So it could be that those bucks are moving and they're just off of you, or they're just fringing on you as well. Those home ranges differ a great deal for different bucks.
Well,
but one thing I will tell you, I have noticed through the years, like if I catch a buck and I watch what pattern he makes, it might be 2 years later, 3 years later, 5 years later, but I've had other bucks take on almost the exact same home range and do the same type thing that a buck years before did. So even though you're looking at a picture and you think, well, this buck isn't helping me at all, you really want to keep all your pictures through the years, because you never know when activity from another buck helps you piece together a puzzle of a buck you're hunting this year. It might be pictures you took 10 years ago. So you really need to keep track of all your pictures.
That's really interesting. And kind of go back to your point, you were talking about the bucks that run quite a bit having smaller antlers. When you said that, I immediately thought of a buck that we watched the last couple of years. I mean, he is a roamer. I mean, he's everywhere all over the farm. I mean, in front of every camera, any part of the day, sometimes, from one end of the farm to the next. It's about 600 acres, within the same day. And he is not he's definitely not a big rack buck, but I mean, he's mature at this point.
Yeah, we've got a buck we call the Guardian, and I swear it gets worse each year. I have another buck I call the Traveler. He gets worse each year. It's like, these bucks that have that personality, they just don't ever seem to have the antler growth to go with it. So that's why we always say age before beauty, and we try to manage by age and not rack size, because sometimes those really pretty 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds look mighty appealing, but in reality you need to be hunting that 6 or 7-year-old bully that only scores 120 or 130 inches, because he's the best one to take out of the herd.
That's an interesting point there as well. So do you see any kind of correlation with that bully, maybe that 135-inch 8-pointer that may be 6 or 7 years old, running off some of your better 3-year-olds that have, up-and-comers that have a lot of potential? Do they move those off the farm sometimes? Do you notice that happening?
Oh, 100% they do, yeah. And we probably see it a little more than you might say in a place that's not managed as heavily as ours is, because we have so many bucks. So we see it a lot, and we try to target those old bully bucks. I mean, And they're a trophy in my eyes. Once a deer gets to 5 or 6 years old, he doesn't know if he's got 170 inches on his head or 130. One thing's for sure, he's got a track record in that brain that makes him very tough to harvest once he gets to that age.
Absolutely.
So they're all trophies. When a deer gets to 5 years old, he is a formidable deer to go and try and hunt. They're very tough to run into during daylight hours. Very tough, regardless of what's on their head.
Something that we've noticed, and maybe it's just been like you were talking earlier, the personality of the bucks. But something that we've also noticed is it seems like once they get to be 7.5, they're incredibly hard to hunt at 5.5, 6.5. But it seems like 7.5. We've had a couple deer that have been 8.5, 9.5. They just are in the daylight like you would not believe. Is that something that you guys pick up on as well?
100%. Yeah. If they can make it to that age, which it's.
Right.
I would say less than 0.5% of the bucks that hit the ground ever make it to 7 or 8. But if they make it to that age, they get much easier to kill because it goes back to they're trying to survive, they're trying to eat. They're much more likely to be seen during daylight than when they're 4 or 5, when they're physiologically perfect and fully mature. By the time they start aging, they get a little bit easier to kill just because they got to go eat more, and they just aren't as sharp as they were when they were young. It's no different than we are as humans. I mean, I'm 51 now, and I'm not even close to the way I was at 25 or 30. Even sitting there in the stand, I'm not as aware. I don't have the vision I used to have. I don't react the way I used to. I can't pull my bow like I used to. All that type of stuff. And I think deer are no different. They're just a little bit weaker species by that time.
Well, I guess that kind of answers my question because we didn't know exactly what it was. Was it physiological differences, or was it they've reached a certain point in time in their life where they feel I guess maybe more secure, moving throughout the daylight because they've lived unharassed life by the time they've gotten to 7 or 8, and maybe aren't as fearful of predation. And you're probably right. I was just curious. That was kind of our two theories as to what it was.
I would say that I most notice that at about age 8 that they get a little sloppy.
Okay.
And I think it's just that, and they get most sloppy during the late part of the season. December.
Mm-hmm.
They got to come back to that food source. That's why I draw my conclusion to say they're just past their prime and they're not as sharp as they once were in terms of avoiding hunters or. They start getting banged around by other deer, and that aggressive 4 or 5-year-old might push them out of their home range. You just never know. It depends what physical health they're into because that varies from deer to deer, and not every 7-year-old or every 8-year-old is created equally.
Absolutely.
Some of them, they might have gone through a bout of EHD and they're not they don't have the internal fortitude that they did prior to EHD. Did they get secondary diseases that brought their overall health down? It's no different than humans or dogs. Not every 10-year-old dog is in the same health that others were, depending on diet. Not every human's the same. They go through diseases, they go through infections, and there are little bitty things that make them weaker in later age than other deer that might not be experiencing that.
Right.
I want to go back and ask a question just to kind of hone in on this a little bit, Mark. We talked about, you mentioned that Terry had a couple of big deer that were showing up September 15th to mid-October kind of thing. It's something that helped me kill a mature deer this past year, and I think it's something that a lot of guys miss out on. And I've heard you talk about it before. I've heard other guys that kill big deer talk about it. Specifically reviewing back those old pictures, like you said that these deer will they're going to come back in around the same time. How specific is that? Like, in other words, if I'm getting a picture of a big deer this year or this past year on, say, October 15th through the 20th, how important is it that I capitalize on that? Will that deer show up almost to the same day, or will it be within a week of that time frame? How concrete is that?
It's not concrete, but the likelihood increases greatly. I will say that the things that I've seen change that would be overall crop rotation. So, if he's in a certain area because of a bean field all summer, and then the next year that same field is in corn, he may very well not be there the next year. So you got to keep in mind crop rotation. You've also got to keep in mind other things that can change that. Was the rainfall greater in the spring this past year than it is this coming spring? Do I have incredible foliage and ground cover one year, and then the next year we're in a drought and you don't have nearly as much, therefore the bed changes? Are the daytime highs the same from year to year? Was it really warm? Is that why he was coming out of the north end of this bottom? Those types of things. So always look at every single thing that can affect a deer's movement. But I will say, yes, it increases greatly if you have a history with him, specifically if that history reaches out beyond 2 years. He's very likely to do it the coming year. But if he doesn't, then start looking around. Okay, where did he go, and why was he here last year, and why was he not? Look at every single thing, whether it be weather, crop rotation, mass crop. There are little things that will change where they're bedding.
In relation to, let's talk about like an early season deer that you want to get on. Because this I'm going to totally steal from this and use this myself, because there's a couple of big deer that I feel like I can kill the first week of September if they continue to do the same sort of things they did before. When you're doing your scouting, or planning on when you're going to go in after these deer, are you waiting for the weather to be correct with like a high barometric pressure? Obviously the wind direction has to be right. Or are you taking any chances at all early on a deer like that? Is it worth the risk? Are you just using long distance scouting? Or are you using your cameras to tell you when to move in? How do you know when it's time to dive in there and go after that target buck early in the season?
Well, I generally, if I've got a particular target buck, if I can set up for a north wind spot, that's when I'm going to kill him. I mean, more often than not, the bucks that I've killed early part of the season have been on a north wind, because early part of the season you're always dealing with heat, right? So every time it does get cold, it seems like the deer move quite well. So I have a tendency to set up my best food plot strategies in the areas that I know a north wind works. So that's probably the biggest tip I can give you. Another factor that factors into the early season is no doubt cameras, staying on top of them and knowing what's happening in and around those green fields or that food source that deer's coming to. But you got to be smart about where you place those cameras, so that it might be one that's on time elapse, or a cell phone camera or something like that, so that you don't have to intrude to go in there. Because one thing about it, if you're seeing a deer during daylight during the early part of the season, he's probably bedded within 100, 150 yards of where you're seeing him. I mean, they bed so close to the food. Your strategy has to be absolutely perfect, or you're going to run him out and never know that you did it. So you've got to be very, very cautious on your approach, both going into the stand and out of the stand.
So in relation to that, how often do you typically check cameras, throughout the summer or maybe early season, or do you just wait for the appropriate weather fronts to do so?
I do around that. I put my cameras out around mid-July, and then I'll check them in mid-August, and then just based on history and knowing what deer are where, I then don't check them a whole heck of a lot until I'm in there hunting them, come mid-September. I might sneak into a few key cameras that I've got in prime spots that are on time elapse that I can get into and out of middle part of the day without ever affecting the deer. But I try not to check them just too awfully much. If there's a rain event, that's another free pass where you can sneak in, check it, and get out during the rain, and kind of erases your scent. But I'm very cautious on that early season. I'm just going off of history, and I'm hunting a particular deer, so I'm using last year's pictures. If I know he's still alive and I know he's in the area, and I've confirmed that either in mid-August or mid-September, then I'm going to hunt that deer for the most part, and not check them a whole heck of a lot.
So let me ask you another question about cameras then, and this kind of it is directly affecting me. So last year we had a deer. He was a really nice deer, but we were giving him a pass last year. He was incredibly camera shy. We could move the camera 30 yards and pick him back up. I mean, he was still using the same area. We would see him. But once he went past the camera, he would see it. He would completely and totally bail. He wouldn't go past it. The majority of the other deer we've never had that problem with. What are maybe some strategies for that? We thought about maybe putting the cameras up higher in the tree, leaving them out year long, or all year long, to try to combat that. What are your thoughts on that situation?
Yeah, I generally have my cameras in the same places each and every year, and I don't see a ton of that, but I've seen a few bucks that are kind of camera shy. And you can actually use that to your advantage as well. If you've got 2 or 3 gaps that you don't want them coming out, you can put a camera there.
Oh, that's interesting.
And bet he's going to use the area that doesn't have a camera. But I use a lot of time-lapse functions, and I'll put it on time-lapse out at a distance, focused on a particular field or a particular area, and then just let it roll, and then go in there. It's kind of like sitting there and hunting, yet you're not there when you go check that card. You put it on time-lapse, it'll tell you where they came out, where they're at, where they're feeding, and all that good stuff. So I would say time-lapse would be the best bet for a guy like that, or a cell camera up in the trees or something.
Okay.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting.
That's very interesting.
It's a new approach that I'm going to combine with some other stuff, I think, this year to try to...
So we're talking back, it's still early season. You're talking about, north wind, and that's usually accompanying like a higher pressure day. Something I've heard you talk about in past, podcast episodes or on the show a little bit. The first south wind after a bunch of norths, or maybe the first north after a bunch of souths. What are we looking for there? I mean, what's the reasoning for that?
Yeah, just change. It's another front. If you get a consistent north wind for 5, 6, 7 days, and it's much more accentuated during the latter part of the season than it is the front part of the season, but there's still a bump in deer movement during that particular day. Often that's the highest pressure of the system, and it's the first day that it comes back out of the south. So if you've had a bunch of norths and then it changes, and that pressure also bumps with it, you can bet they're going to move quite well, particularly if it's a windy south. I like a south with speed on it. If you get 5 or 6 days out of the north, and then all of a sudden you get a south wind at 12, 13 mile an hour, and it's the first south, and the pressure's up about 30.2, look out. Every deer in the herd is going to be on their feet that afternoon if it's sunny. It's just a real good day, and it's all about change in weather, some sort of change. Make them change off the pattern that they're in because of weather. And I did a podcast not long ago, and the gentleman called me up and he said, I want you to take the counterpoint to some biologists who did some radio collard studies, and their conclusion was that weather has no effect on deer movement whatsoever. Deer don't move because of the weather change. And I said, "Are you serious about this question?" And he said, "Yes, I am." And I said, "That's amazing to me.
Yeah.
I mean, they are so weather related. It's not even funny, And I just couldn't even believe that was the conclusion drawn on the other side of it. So I don't know how you guys feel, but every deer I kill is because of the weather.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, 100%.
Why do you think that study maybe showed that? Do you think that, what are they doing in that study? Do they have radio collars on those deer?
I haven't a clue.
Yeah.
They were radio collars, and I haven't a clue. I can't.
I wonder if they're not like recording like the time of day and stuff like that they're moving, and they're just seeing that deer are moving throughout, within a 24-hour period, to where maybe they're doing some of that after dark or whatever. I don't know. That's
I don't know.
That's wild.
I would love to sit down and look at the data and see how they drew that conclusion, because it seems unlikely to me to have that conclusion on any study with a deer.
Yeah, I mean,
or any
animal, right?
Turkeys, hogs, rabbits, squirrels. I mean, you name it. The weather's what influences them. Mule deer, whitetails, elk. It doesn't matter, man. The weather's, they got to live and they got to survive, and it's all about the weather.
So another thing that we hear a lot about, and there's a lot of controversy over this, is what about the moon? How do you think that it affects the rut? How do you think it, affects deer movement in general throughout the year? It doesn't necessarily have to be the rut. I know like it obviously affects fish and like some spawning and things like that. Does it have any effect on turkeys, and their breeding cycle?
I don't think that it affects turkeys. I think that's your question. You're just a little muffled, so I'm not sure. Was your question, does weather affect turkeys? Is that what your question was?
No. I'm sorry. I'm talking about the full moon. How does it affect deer? How does it affect turkeys? Other animals throughout.
Oh, how does the full moon?
Okay. Yeah. And how does the full moon affect deer around the rut? And do you think it plays any effect?
I think it's one of the most major factors that actually exposes or hides deer movement in and around the rut. I think that the rut, the peak estrus, happens in and around the same time, at least where I'm hunting. It's generally from about the 10th through the 15th. To me, those 5 days represent peak breeding each and every year. And the moon, how it hits the rut, really, really, really reflects daylight activity. And we learn this by watching them not just in November, but by watching them in September, October, December, January, and any other time of the year. In a general rule, what we've noticed, if you look at the full moon, and by and large, I see a lot more daylight activity in and around the full moon than I do on the dark of the moon, at least where I'm hunting. And if you look at the full moon and back up about 7 days, the 7 days that precede the full moon, as the moon's rising in the afternoons, we see a lot of afternoon activity. And then just about the time it turns full and starts setting of a morning and no longer is rising visibly in the evening, I start to see more morning activity in and around the full moon. The time that I see the least amount of daylight activity, not only with my eyes, but the several million reconyx photos I've shot over the last few years, is during the dark of the moon. If you take the dark of the moon, back up or go forward 7 days off of it, that generally represents the least amount of movement that I see. So therefore, what periods of the rut get exposed, in other words, i.e.
Right.
daylight activity during the chasing phase, makes you think, oh, wow, it was an intense rut this year. Or daylight activity during the seeking phase after the full moon or after the peak estrus, also you think, oh, man, what a great rut. That's why every rut seems different.
Right.
And in reality, the peak estrus happens the same time every year, in my opinion.
Right. It's just the moon just highlights what is shown to us as hunters.
But the moon absolutely influences deer movement, but not nearly as much as the weather does.
So not even just in relation to the rut, but that same thing with the full moon and the 7 days prior with the rising moon in the afternoons and the setting moons in the morning. The same thing goes there, doesn't it? I mean, it's a lot more
Absolutely.
likely to have a bigger deer on their feet. I mean, I took advantage of that last year and killed a 7.5-year-old on September 4th last year.
There you go. If you look at this year's coming full moon, I think it's what's it full? November the 21st or 22nd?
I think it's the
somewhere around there.
22nd. Yeah.
Is it November 22nd?
I think so. Yeah.
To me, that's a horrible full moon for the rut. I think we're going to see, less daylight activity than in normal years. I think the period right after peak estrus, like 15 through 19, right in there, could be very good. But I think some of the other phases aren't going to be as good. However, if you look at September, the 15th through the 21st is going to be very, very good. Or 15th through the, our season opens the 15th in Missouri. That's why I'm talking about that. From then till the full moon is going to be very good in the afternoons, because typically afternoons are better that time of the year. So with that full moon rising, it makes them even better. And likewise, you get into mid-December, when that moon's rising early in the afternoon, mid-December is going to be off the charts. So while we may not see a great rut in terms of daylight activity, September is going to be good, December is going to be good, October is going to be a little bit iffy, in my opinion.
Well, I kind of hate to hear you say, too, that in Indiana our gun season usually opens up right around November 15th. I kind of hated to hear that you thought the best 4 days in November would be the 15th through the 19th.
Yeah, that's not good for the deer herd around here, for sure.
No.
Well, I just think in the afternoons, once they lose their does and they go back to seeking, that week prior to the full moon in November is going to be pretty good. They're going to get on their feet early in the afternoon and really be out there. But consequently, it's generally much more midday than it is late evening anyway.
Right.
So beware from about noon through about 4, the 15th through the 20th. Just I don't want to say you can write it down, but I'll be out there. I can tell you that. It's going to be really good if the weather's right. Now, warm weather trumps all, and it'll slow them down, But if it's at normal temperature or below normal temperature, they should move quite well during that period.
So I know you said you'll be out there then, but tell us a little bit about when will you start hunting mornings?
I generally don't hunt a morning until around the 4th, 5th, 6th of November. And other than that, just the occasional cold front. And one thing you never want to miss, if you've had extended warm temperatures, and all of a sudden there's a cold front that blows in overnight. The first morning that wind's out of the north is generally incredible, and I'll hunt every one of those.
Even in early October?
It's September, October, whatever. Yep.
All right.
Yep. They move incredibly well that day.
So what kind of setup are you going to in that situation?
I'll be somewhere, if it's early in the season, on an acorn flat where they're slipping back to bed, someplace I've had luck in the past. That's good for a north wind,
Okay, makes sense. Wyatt asked earlier, I don't know if you heard this because you said it was a little bit muffled there, but and maybe you did answer it and I didn't catch up with it, but the moon and the effect on turkeys. Did you
Yeah, well, I guess my point, or my only question was, I mean, you never hear anything about moon phases, and I've never seen any correlation with turkeys, as far as their breeding cycle or anything like that.
I don't see a correlation with the moon and turkeys.
Yeah.
To me, they're more cover related, weather related. It's a much more elongated process. I mean, I don't see a big correlation like I do with deer. Turkeys are extremely hard to figure out. You just got to be out there because you never know when it can happen. But they're very difficult to figure, in my opinion.
Mark, I want to ask a question. Shift gears just a little bit here. I want to ask a question. There's something that I'm sure you probably get some of this on social media. I'm sure you do, without a doubt. But the folks that say things like, well, I can't do that. I can't hunt big deer. I can't, manage a farm or anything like that. Talk a little bit about where you were and Terry and Drury Outdoors was, say, 20
years ago.
25, even 30 years ago, where you were at with your hunting and how you got to where you are now.
Well, it's a long story, obviously. I mean, we started in 1989, so we're approaching our 30th anniversary here, and we always had that drive to either find a better spot or make our spot better, and that drive is still here today. I'm constantly searching, looking for a better spot on the farm or trying to make it better. And what we learned somewhere probably 15 years ago, there's no pot of gold out there. We always wanted to find that pot of gold, but in reality, you're better off just to take the situation you're in and make that spot better. That's your best strategy than anything else, provided you're in a spot where there's reasonable amount of big deer. So we try to maximize the habitat on our farms, whether it be food, water cover, whatever. We try to take it to the next level and make our farms a place that is desirable for a mature deer to live. We don't always win that battle, but we're trying to hunt the biggest deer in the herd. So no matter where we're at or where someone's at that might be listening to this, and we do get that comment a lot. Well, I could do that too if I lived there, or I can't do that where I'm at. Well, you still have the desire to go be the best you can in your hunting area and hunt the best deer you know of, whether that best deer is a 2-year-old 120-inch or whether that best deer is a 6-year-old 200-incher. The tactics are still the same, and the desire to hunt the best deer you can find is generally still the same. So there is a relation in that standpoint. But we started many years ago, and our desire just took us to the point we're at now to find a better spot or make our spot better. And we've been hunting them a long time, and that's what we try to do, is just make the habitat better, be good stewards of the land, share the sport with as many people as we can, teach as many people as we can, and it's really about that for us anymore as much as anything.
And I think you guys do a tremendous job of that, of the teaching aspect and sharing you guys' knowledge with what you're doing. If you could say just a couple of things to a beginning hunter, somebody that is just starting, and maybe they're a little bit discouraged, and because here's the reality of it. If I flip on the Outdoor Channel and I watch Drury Outdoors videos, I'm going to see a whole lot of big deer. I'm going to see a lot of big deer getting harvested, and it's not just Drury Outdoors. It's across the entire platform. If I go online and look, I'm going to see a lot of big deer getting taken. So to somebody that's beginning, knowing that that's not realistic for somebody that's just starting hunting, and that's not something they're going to see. There's not big deer like that around every tree, despite what we see on television. What would you say to somebody to encourage them or to give them hope that they can get to that point maybe at some point? Or what should they be focusing on early in their hunting careers?
I would say early on, try to learn as much as you possibly can. And while you may look at a particular show and go, I'm not going to hunt a deer that size, but could you learn something from the person that just hunted that deer that size, whether that be, Michael Waddell or Leon Tiff or Ted Nugent or one of our shows or whoever it might be. You can still take something away about how that deer acted when he came in, the shot that hunter took, how that hunter called to that deer, or whatever tactics it took to get to that moment. So you can break down the film and still learn something from that moment. Or where was that hunter sitting? Why are all the big deer getting killed in the Midwest? I mean, it's no secret where the bulk of the big deer are,
right,
down in Texas or wherever they are. So if that's what you seek, is to go out and find a bigger deer to hunt, then you've got to go where those deer live. They're not going to miraculously appear in your area if they're not there. You've got to go somewhere where they live. And that's, I always tell Terry, and we talk about it all the time, we were blessed to have grown up in the Midwest. And, we didn't realize it when we were growing up, but, the biggest deer herds in the world, all live within about 10 hours of us in any different direction. So we're fortunate in that respect. So that was just, good fortune. But you can always learn something no matter what the instance is. And if you look at it and go, well, I can't go kill a deer like that, but you can still learn something from someone who did, and then apply that to your neck of the woods, whether you're hunting a forkhorn that's a 1.5-year old or a 2-year-old, wherever you're at, still go out. And if that's the biggest deer you can find, that's a trophy. Just harvesting any deer with any weapon is a trophy if you go through the process. And then when you sit down and you bring full conclusion to that process with that meal, I mean, that's really where the trophy comes into it, is when you sit down and prepare it and go, man, that is fantastic right there.
Well, and that advice probably can be applied to even, people that have hunted for a lot of years. I mean, you're talking about continuing to learn and things like that. I mean, obviously, you and Terry and everybody else with your all's team, it's a constant, it's a constant learning curve. You're constantly looking for something new, I'm sure, or you guys wouldn't be where you're at now.
And I say that based on my own experiences. When I sit down and I watch the Outdoor Channel, I'm watching, the shot that T-Bone just made, or what Tiffany's doing to kill that deer, or what Lee did to kill that deer, or whoever it is, whatever show I'm watching, I'm trying to learn from them, because you'll never know it all. There's no way you can do that. You never stop learning. And that's the way life should be, though, really. I mean, whether it be in work, your family, educating your kids, raising your children, you never stop learning. So I'm a question asker, man. I've been that way my whole life. I ask a lot of questions. I'm just trying to learn from those people that I'm talking to, regardless of what it's about. If it's about baseball or living or religion or hunting, whatever it is, I want to know what they're thinking, and it's a good place to be when you're learning and trying to get better at who you are as a person.
Yeah, and I think that's a very humbling thing to say. I mean, coming from somebody, on the platform that you guys are at, and I think that can, we should all take that advice, to heart, because we should all do that more. Maybe even somebody not as experienced as you or me or anybody, we might be able to pull a piece of advice from them and learn something new.
Absolutely, it's what makes the world go around,
yep.
man. Learn. You never stop learning. And when I see a good deer hunter, any deer hunter, man, I'm asking them questions.
Right.
And if they kill a big deer, the first thing I want to do is go, how'd you kill it? What was the weather like? How'd you kill it? What was the weather like that day? Were you in his bed? Were you on food? How'd you kill him? I ask every question I can, because you never know when somebody's going to say something that turns a light bulb on for you, and then you go out and you get better because of it.
What were the GPS coordinates of where you killed that? No.
Yeah, that's a good question there. Hey, yeah, I want to also shift gears again here a little bit, Mark. I know you guys hunt some in Illinois. Have you been following what's going on with the Illinois state legislature or anything as far as them trying to get the mineral supplements out of season legalized so they can do supplemental feeding there in that state?
To some degree, yes, I have. I've been in touch with the guys up at Analogics who are help leading that charge, and it seems like it's going in a positive manner there.
Okay. Well, we get some news from that, and you see stuff, and I just didn't know if you had heard any news from them, and kind of just wanted to follow up on that. And I know that's something a lot of guys would benefit from if they could get that pushed through, for sure.
Absolutely, and I believe in it. I think a healthier herd is better when you're putting the right stuff out there for them and help supplement that overall health of that herd. So it really comes down to what you're putting in front of them. And I don't necessarily subscribe to the theory that one deer going to a mineral lick is going to pass a disease on to another if it's done correctly and it's the right product there. Because deer are social animals anyway. I mean, you can watch them sitting there; they lick all over each other. They're touching noses all the time. So I don't think you're going to.
You're not going to spread or help.
You're not going to stop it.
Yeah.
You're not going to stop that. So if you can help their health by putting the right products out there, I don't know why we would not want to do that.
Well, I agree with that.
Absolutely, it does nothing but benefit the overall health of the deer herd. So why not?
Why not? Exactly.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about. I know that when is it the end of June? Whenever the new shows are going to roll out.
July 3rd this year is
July 3rd.
That week.
Yeah, what do you guys have on the radar? I know you guys have some new shows coming out. What are they? What are they about?
We're going to launch the show that replaces Dream Season, which is called Critical Mass, which we're very excited to share that with the rest of the world. Bow Madness will be out there again, and of course 13. So we've got some good stuff. I mean, the shows this year are going to be off the charts. Everything we've seen and watched, and it's just at a higher level than we've ever been before. So I'm very excited about that.
And there's a lot of new team members as well, isn't there?
We do have a few new team members, especially on that Critical Mass show. Very interesting format and fun show to watch.
Cool.
And
we look forward to it.
July 3rd, is that when that's going to hit? You probably don't have times yet, do you?
It'll be 9 Central and 9:30 Central, the power hour, as we like to call it. It'll be 13 first, followed by Critical Mass.
Okay. Very good. We're definitely going to be looking forward to watching those. And Wyatt, you got anything else?
Yeah, I do. I have one question for you, and this really doesn't necessarily have to do with deer. I think it has more to do with us as hunters in general. What would you say is the biggest piece of advice that you could give hunters, whether that be new or old hunters, what we can do to continue to have the opportunity to hunt in future years and make sure that our children and grandchildren and the people that follow us have the same opportunities that we've had?
That's a very poignant question, and it's one that is relevant given the latest surveys and everything that came out. I think back in, 1995, there was like 7.7% of the U.S. population hunted, and now we're down to like 4.4, and that's not the trend you like to see. There's a lot of privatization out there. I met with the Missouri Department of Conservation, I don't know, maybe 2-3 months ago, and we were sitting down talking about CWD and EHD. Terry and I were out there with the guys from Heartland Bow Hunter. They had invited us into a meeting, and one of the most telling things that I heard in that meeting was the fact that overall recruitment of hunters were up, youth hunters. Very successful program in the state of Missouri and many other states in the fact that you can start them younger. They have their own specified season. But the thing that was striking to me is the data they showed us in the drop-off. Once those children reached the age where they were no longer being taken out as a youth, they didn't continue on by buying the normal licenses for bow and gun,
really?
which was striking to me. It was a dramatic drop-off, like they literally fell off the earth, and he said they never come back. They're with us and they're hunting with us as a youth up to the age of 16, and then they just disappear out of our database. They're not there anymore. So I think in some way, shape, or form, we as hunters have to figure out how to recruit. We've got to make sure we take care of our public lands. That's of paramount importance so that people have the places to go. And then we've got to continue to mentor and teach our children to, just because I took you as a child, now you've got to go out and do it on your own. You got to keep going. And I think it's almost, I mentioned it that day in the meeting, have we created an entitlement state in hunting in that we're taking them as a youth, and you always carry them out during the youth season, but are you showing them the right things so that they know how to do it on their own once they exit out of that, And, I wonder whether the youth seasons from that standpoint are a bit of a negative. Otherwise, why would the drop-off be occurring? Do they get to the age 16 and go, well, I don't know how to do this. I've always hunted with dad, or I've always hunted with mom. So we've got to make sure that we're teaching people and putting them in positions where they can succeed on their own out there, and they don't need someone holding their hand.
We were talking on a podcast just a few weeks ago, and we were kind of talking about our first deer and stuff. And the first deer that I ever shot at was a really big deer. And then the one that I actually kind of missed him because I choked. But regardless, the deer that I ended up killing, he was a little 5-pointer, year and a half. And to this day, I'm glad that I missed that bigger deer. And it took me a whole nother year to get an opportunity and then kill that smaller one. Simply because I think if I would have killed that first deer, I might have been a little bit spoiled and not realized the work and dedication and stuff that goes into it, and kind of that whole process that becomes fun, leading up to that.
Absolutely.
That's a good point that you brought up there, Mark, because I almost feel like, I'm going to sound like an old codger here whenever I say this, but, it's like it's almost like the educational system with kids these days. It's like everybody, we're babying them too much, I think, We're not really allowing them to grow as people. It's the everybody gets a ribbon for everything kind of generation, and maybe we are going out there and kind of holding their hand just a little bit too much and not really showing them the entire process of everything that goes into the hunt. We're just setting them up and saying, "Hey, here you are. You're set up in a good spot, and you shoot."
And that's what I was getting at. Like with my scenario was, I know, and I've been guilty of this. We've taken a lot of kids out, and we try to make sure that they get something, and a lot of times try to make sure that they get something pretty darn nice. For their first year or second year, whatever, and then all of a sudden, like Mark was saying, they're at 16 and they're like, holy crap, how do I do this? Because we're doing all that work for them. Maybe we should be involving them in all the work leading up to it and then putting them in a tree stand. I don't know.
Well, yeah, we want to make sure we're raising a generation of hunters and not shooters.
Yes, exactly.
That's my point, because I didn't understand. I really never thought of it in those terms until he said they're dropping off the face of the earth. Like, it was a dramatic drop off. He was like, and we never get them back. They don't come back. And I'm like, well, where'd they go? He said, we don't know. They just seem to have stopped hunting. And that was scary to me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that one's very concerning. That is. So, was there any talk at all about recruitment outside of the youth age in that conversation with the DNR?
It wasn't the purpose of the meeting. But it certainly deserves a conversation. It's one that Terry and I have all the time about introducing new people into the sport, introducing influencers. Our world has changed so drastically in the terms of social media. We need to get more and more positive vibes out there about hunting through the social media channels, particularly with the big influencers out there. I love the fact that Joe Rogan's such an outspoken advocate for our sport.
Yeah.
But we need about 100 Joe Rogans or 1,000 Joe Rogans. We don't have enough of them. That's the biggest issue in my opinion.
So how do we attract those folks? What can we do to get more people with a bigger voice involved?
Well, we've got to invite them hunting. Frankly,
Yeah.
That's what we talk about. I met with a gentleman maybe a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, and he had 800,000 followers on Instagram, and I'm not going to mention his name because it was a private meeting, and we were just talking, and he was talking about what we did, and this gentleman did not hunt, and he said, man, I just could never get over out there killing an animal, and I said, when it comes down to it, though, it's not about killing that animal, it's about feeding yourself. That's how I turned his phrase around to him, and he said, you're right. He goes, I eat hamburger and pork and chicken all the time. He goes, I'm a hypocrite, aren't I? And I said, well, I'm not going to call you a hypocrite, but you're just letting somebody else kill your food for you. In my case, more often than not, what I'm eating, I've harvested and cleaned myself, and I know where my meat comes from. And
yeah.
He was like, would you take me hunting? I said, I'd absolutely love to take you hunting. And I said, more importantly, I can't wait to prepare the meal for the animal that you harvest. I said, that is when it all comes full circle for a new hunter. And he's all excited, man, and he's going to get a bow and Hopefully I'm going to take him hunting this fall. So we need more of those type of conversations going on and sharing our sport as opposed to hiding our sport. We're all so afraid of what people are going to think. But in reality, if they ever go out there and sit down to a delicious meal of wild game, everybody's going to be a hunter. In my opinion, it's just got to be prepared right, and they've got to understand that we've all evolved from hunters and gatherers. So it's just about having the appropriate conversations, in my opinion.
I don't want what you just said, Mark. I don't want that to get lost in this conversation. The way you put that, I mean, I've heard it said so many times, but not in that manner. It's not about killing that animal. It's about feeding yourself. That's about as direct and to the point as you can possibly get. I've heard so many times about guys talk about, hey, I'm taking responsibility for what I eat, and I'm going to know where that food comes from. But the way you put it about, it's not about killing the animal, it's about feeding yourself, that drives it home. I mean, just to the point where that gentleman said, I'm a hypocrite. Well, he's not really, like you said, but it's just something that people don't think about a whole lot when they go through a McDonald's drive-thru and order a cheeseburger.
Exactly. Goes without any thought. But in reality, that's why we're all still alive. It just goes unseen. Nobody knows where it came from. Nobody sees it. It's the hidden, slaughterhouse. It's not out there on social media. You never see it. But there's animals dying everywhere right now so that we can live.
Oh, yeah.
Well, what's the difference between that and taking it ourselves, We're all trying to, feed ourselves and feed our family at the end of the day.
Well, and I think that there's a certain amount of hunters that have definitely kind of lost that the importance of eating our meat and showing that that we're eating our meat, and unfortunately, I think to the general public, it's kind of thought of more of a look how big a man I am than it is actually looked at as look at the food that we're consuming and bringing in, and there's no hormones in these. We know exactly who's handled it and how it was prepared and everything else. And but we definitely need to do what you say and start that conversation a lot more often with more people, and start it in the manner that you started it with, as opposed to saying, yeah, I'm a hunter and I go and kill animals, and instead of say that, or if somebody says that to you, be able to combat that with, well, I'm feeding myself and my family and my friends, and it's a lot more than going out and just taking an innocent animal's life.
Absolutely. And there's just something so fulfilling about sitting down to a meal of an animal that you harvested. To me, I mean,
without a doubt,
it's just the most incredible feeling, especially when you share it with others or share it with family. There's just something that hits you down deep when you're sitting there enjoying a venison steak or a wild turkey, burger or whatever it is. It's like, man, we did this together, or I provided this meal, and it's a nice feeling. That's what I was telling that gentleman. I said, man, if you ever experience it, that first meal from an animal that you harvested, I said, you'll never stop hunting. I can promise you that. And he's all jacked about it, and he wants to go. So we're going to film it, and we're going to put it out there.
It's the memories the memories that go along with it when you're sitting there eating it. I mean, it takes you right back to that place, when everything went down. I mean, and you constantly, you get to share that with somebody else, and then, I completely understand what you're saying. It's kind of hard to put into words, but it is definitely a euphoric feeling.
I know.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to seeing this hunt go down and the entire process. And you put that together. I'm sure you guys are going to do a great job of, win, lose, or draw there, of documenting that whole experience and the transformation of what this young man's going to go through in that process. And
he's not a young man. He's probably 45.
Well, that's a young man.
Even better.
That's a young man, isn't it?
That's young to you, Dave.
Come on, busting my chops here. That's good stuff. So what do you got working on today, Mark? I know you're probably going to be out this evening doing something. What do you got going on?
Well, actually, I'm about to walk back into the studio and finish some proofing of some shows, and just trying to get these first shows out. That's the stress level at our studio right now. But this is never a pleasant week at our studio. The first week that all the shows are due, everybody's a little fussy around here. I'm the only happy one in the whole building.
Well, I know you're extremely busy, and we don't want to keep you too long, but man, just really do appreciate you making time for us to come on and share some of your knowledge And man, it's just been a pleasure. Wyatt, you got anything else?
No, it sure has. Thanks a lot, Mark. Appreciate it. Appreciate the insight. Not only from the deer hunting standpoint, but just as a hunter standpoint. It's it's impactful. So.
I appreciate very much you guys having me on. I always enjoy the visit. Thank you very much.
Yeah,
Yes,
and if there's anything we can do, at any point in time to help you guys out, or anything we could do at all, just let us know, buddy.
All right. Thank you very much, guys. Have a great afternoon.
Hey, good luck
All
with
right.
everything.
Take care, Mark.
Bye.
Bye-bye.